In the wise words of Stanley Ipkiss, we all wear masks, metaphorically speaking. That's Jim Carrey from The Mask. If you don't know about that movie, it's time to watch that movie because it's amazing. But in all seriousness, or as serious as I ever get, today on the Bad Creatives podcast, I'm talking about unmasking, specifically in my art and where I'm at with it today. Unmasking isn't just about not giving up. It's noticing all the ways that you've been editing yourself out of your art, perhaps out of your own life. The bad creative, yeah. When I was younger, I quickly learned that if I looked a certain way, that life would be easier for me. I could be accepted and fly under the radar as long as I looked good enough, coupled with seeming dumb and unassuming. My initial mask developed primarily around my outward appearance. And I didn't mean to seem like I was dumb. I just was spaced out a lot and not listening to anything anyone was saying. And so then when somebody would ask me a question, I'd be like, huh? Which does sound kind of dumb. And then everybody would laugh and be like, oh, you. And I would just be like, everyone's laughing. Okay. I just went along with it because I was very shy. And at the time I was like, this is just easier for me. I am in survival mode to the extreme. I have talked a little bit about that in other videos. If you want to know more about that, you can go back to Why Women Mask. Unmasking is something that we do sometimes intentionally, whether we know it's masking or not. There are certain things that we do to survive, to get by, to make life easier. And so I am able to look around me and go, oh, what would work here? What can I do with this? And develop this sort of forward-facing mask, this fragmented piece of myself. When I decided to start creating more vulnerably, that was really scary for me because I'd always wanted to be doing music and writing, and the dreams that I have now, I've always had. I mean, I don't know that I dreamed to have a podcast because I didn't know what a podcast was, but if you told me that I could film myself talking and that was a thing, I would have been into that for sure. The knowledge of the fact that masking is something that we do to survive, I think is really important because it can give you a lot more grace for how layered this unmasking process really is. And until we understand what it is that we're doing, we may not even know how deeply ingrained the masking goes because I didn't know that I was autistic until a few years ago. I had no idea all the ways that I had been overcompensating and trying to do things to cover up my executive dysfunction. But the one piece that I knew about myself was that I hid behind the idea that I was dumb and had no depth and that I looked good on the outside to disguise however I felt on the inside. So I was a model for a long time. I was a dancer, the kind that involves poles. Things that really highlighted this strength of seeming dumb and being attractive. It was working for me. I was making money, but when I eventually decided to go back to something that felt more real, I'm not saying those parts of me were 100% fake, but like I mentioned before, they are fragmented. When I decided to dive back into my truth and music and things like that, you kind of have to be willing to put yourself out there in a new way and look bad. And that felt like extra scary for me. And there's a few other reasons for that. And if you want to know a little more about my whole crash out, you can watch the video From Britney to Burnout, where I really get into my initial introduction into the music industry and why that was really extreme. So when we know that we're masking, the benefit of that is now we have a choice. And choice is everything. Now it's not something that we have to do. I mean, sometimes we may argue that we do feel like we have to do it. But when we know we have a choice, we have a little bit more to work with and we have a little bit more options. We're not a victim of something anymore and we have the ability to make changes in our life. One of the ways that we may choose to mask is to have an alter ego. A lot of musicians and artists have an alter ego. Some of them don't even ever show themselves. Lady Gaga, there's not a lot that's really known about her personal life. She's very much a persona, and we may not ever really know how much of a person's persona is real and how much of it is a mask. But I like to think that because we created our masks, it is still a part of us and that the layers underneath are up to us if we decide we want to show them or not. When you are sharing yourself in this way, it's incredibly vulnerable. It's so visceral. And so if you need to have that alter ego, that person who you check into and they get you in the zone, that's a choice. You're that person when you're doing that thing, and then you can leave it at the door, and that can help you to separate your reality from your artist life. And I think when people get very successful, that probably helps them stay sane to some degree. Not everybody wants to be like a reality show version of themselves. I was this way for years where I had the outward persona. I thought it seemed like a really natural way of getting my foot in the door as a musician was by being really sexualized. A lot of musicians are very sexualized, and it worked for years. I was perfectly comfortable having that persona, and I had a lot of fun with that. I was totally fine with just having very, very few people know me on a deeper level and know that I actually had quite a lot of depth and other things going on that I didn't really show. There's a difference between being cool with something and being somewhat performative with something. If you think you're being so real and so authentic because you're like, I don't care about anything, and this pendulum swings all the way to the other end, that's just like another form of masking. You're kind of just pretending that you don't care about anything. The majority of us are somewhere in the middle, and we don't always walk around kicking shot glasses off stages and punching people in the face. If you do, you may want to consider going to anger management. Why did I eventually want to shift how I was showing myself? First of all, I'm an artist, and artists are always evolving. Because I was able to even be putting myself out there as a musician, playing shows, writing music, I was getting more confident in a lot of ways. And the natural evolution of that was that I wanted to keep exploring. What's next? What's underneath that? I've shared this before. I really value truth and personal freedom. So when I started to get a bit bored by always having to explore my music through this narrow lens of the persona that I had been using, I wanted to be able to show another side of me, more depth, more vulnerability, and the fact that I actually have a soft side. I have a lot more going on than just being this kind of dark rock and roll piece of me. I was starting to feel a bit boxed in by that. I started making some more personal vlog style videos and eventually put myself out there as a writer, not just a songwriter, and I got some rude feedback. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was beginning to pivot my audience. It was mainly a male audience. I just felt like I was sick of kind of playing always to men. Like I wanted to speak to a depth of my own that I felt like I didn't really get to explore. I was surrounded by a lot of men. I always worked in male-dominated industries, and I was just sick of it. I just wanted to have more conversations with people like me. I didn't even know where to find people like me, but I definitely knew that I had better conversations with women and with people who are more sensitive or just not the like alpha male kind of guy. And I wrote this book that was seeming almost like it was going to be for men, and then you get like whiplash halfway through when you realize this is definitely not for men, and this is what's really been going on. The upside of that was there were some people who were really into my journey and the evolution of that, and they came along with me, and even my own family and some friends that I had known for years were surprised to see these new layers of me as an artist. They were inspired by that and wanted to talk about their own projects and different things that they had wanted to branch out and start doing, because a lot of artists get kind of pigeonholed into one thing that's working for them. It can be really scary to go, this is working, I'm building momentum, and now I want to pivot. It's terrifying, especially when you think you have to just pick one thing and be really, really good at it. I'd rather feel like I was a little lost in the unknown than to just feel like I was living somebody else's life. So my audience, I tried to keep it for years. It was really hard for me to let it go. Now I know that if I had been willing to be like, you know what, I'm done with this, goodbye, and just trust that everything we do rolls into the next thing. So I took everything I learned into the next chapter of my evolution as an artist. But I held on to that audience, and I think it made it really difficult for me to put myself out there in a new way. I kept censoring things, trying to squeeze something that wasn't quite part of my old life, but not allowing it to just be my new life. So what helped me a lot was just starting a new page that was private so that I could talk about whatever I wanted on there. I didn't care. It was private, so I knew anyone who requested probably really wanted to be there. And I really appreciated having way less followers, but having more engagement because the people who were there chose to be there and they weren't just weird dudes that saw me at a show once where I was playing without a top on because I had roses painted on my boobs. The downside of starting this new audience was that it's really humbling. Every time you evolve as an artist, you're a newcomer. But the way I looked at it was I'd rather be the worst at something with a lot to learn and a lot of room to grow than to be the best I'll ever be at this one thing and feel like I'm just stuck there. I mean, I think with art, it's hard to say that there's like really a ceiling to some of these things, but that's how I felt. I think part of it was like that autistic thing of not wanting to be perceived. We're always going to be curating to some extent. There's a difference between unmasking and being authentic and then creating something that is clear and cohesive. When we're unmasking in our art, it's not like you just throw it all out there and you go, here, you sort through it. It's being able to let yourself express more openly from where you are at any given moment, which the deepest depth you can go to at any given time might not be the ultimate depth. It happens in layers. This is where we can definitely get caught up in perfectionism. It can be tough when you're new at something. You don't get to be perfect at it. And if you haven't done it very many times and you're still working out the kinks, that's a part of that bottom-up processing that autistic people experience. So we don't really have the luxury of just knowing ahead of time how everything's gonna look. How I was learning to do this was I knew what I wanted to experience and I anchored into that, and that gave me what I needed to move forward through the next steps. That got me through the roller coaster of emotions that I felt when pivoting my audience and my entire craft and the art that I was showing the world, and being able to be new at something and be willing to be seen in a new way. So when I was starting to let go of that persona, and I'm not saying that I did a complete 180 and I'm not any version of that anymore. I refined it to something that felt more true to me now. I was able to set some things down and say no to some things. I don't do those things anymore. They're not aligned with what I want most in my creative path. It was hard to let go of those things, for fear I was getting more money from things I used to do than I'm doing now, but I believe it will change. And there was like a huge disappointment from not getting that dopamine hit from something like immediately working. When you know something's working and you know how to do it and you know you're going to get that reaction, it feels good and it's validating. But the validation doesn't last forever if it's something that you don't really feel deeply connected to. As I've mentioned a lot, my top values are authenticity and freedom. So when I was 27, dancing topless at a motorcycle show was my version of authenticity and freedom. I really needed that then, teehee. I see that as my era of taking ownership of myself and my body and not being controlled by, I guess, anybody but my own weird controls. Maybe I wasn't being willing to be seen at my most ultimate depth, but I wasn't hiding anymore. Ironically, today I feel a million times more exposed because I'm so raw and honest. I'm not hiding anything. I'm laying it all out there, and it is pretty exhilarating. I have been able to let go of so many things that were no longer serving me in favor of things that felt more honest and more real. I'm finally coaching people, which is something I have been wanting to do for years, but I was afraid to put myself out there in that way because I thought nobody would believe me, that I had any depth or that I understood anything because I didn't talk about it. Honestly, I've been really afraid to be seen as somebody who knows what they're talking about, who's willing to take up space, because that didn't feel safe for me for so many years of my life. And also, I was trying to uphold this idea that I was cool and mysterious. In reality, I don't give a about being cool. I really don't. I think when you're real and you're doing your thing and you're having a good time, that to me is cool. Also, making this podcast, which is something that I've been wanting to do for years, I didn't want to commit to doing a podcast if I was going to be unwilling to share really openly and honestly. And so I had a lot of deconditioning to do before I was willing to go, okay, fine, this is who I am. I'm just going to speak to my real audience because that's the only things I want to talk about and the only people I want to talk to. If you're all over the place and you're talking to everybody, you feel like, oh, maybe I'll go this, maybe I'll go that. You don't have to be decisive. When you decide, my autistics, hyper-focused people, you know this, like when we decide something, our attention is very attention-y. It will blast a hole through whatever we are looking at. Our hyper-focus is insane. So when I did lock in on this and just decide, it just felt like such a relief because I was like, oh, who cares? Like, I just want to talk about the stuff I want to talk about. And to speak openly and honestly about that and to not dilute it's like very unmasked of me. And it feels good. Sometimes I do still wonder, who would really want to hear about anything that I have to say? But I know for a fact that I still like doing it. And just for today, that is a good enough reason for me. Maybe for you, just for today, disappearing completely into your art is what you really want to do. But if you ever want to try something else, it is your life. So you should definitely just do what you want. Next week, I'm going to get into how I have been unmasking my creative process behind the scenes instead of just what I'm showing forward. If you want to go deeper with me and start to unmask in your own life and in your art, I am now accepting a limited amount of one-on-one coaching clients. We will work through the unmasking process and how to move forward without being burnt out and so much more. If you want to find out more about that, the link is in the show notes, or you could just go to thebadcreatives.com. You deserve to have your life feel like your greatest work of art. Love you. The bad creatives, yeah. The bad creatives. The bad creatives.